All right, I think we are live here. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Spiritual View. And this morning, it is just Sheila and I because Kim is in Thailand at the Elephant Sanctuary. Is that right, Sheila?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's having some signal issues. So I am here in Cabo. It's my last day in Cabo, and I come home tomorrow. And Sheila just got home from Vancouver, and she is now home in I was supposed to say sunny Mexico, but it's not. It's wintry Edmonton. So we thought we would start today by just actually just sharing a little bit about ourselves, because I feel like, sometimes we get to know each other on one level, but we don't necessarily know all the background on each other. And so we thought we'd maybe dig a little bit and share some of our journey that kind of got us to the point of where we're at. So that's what we're looking at today. But before we do that, Sheila, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm a little time sensitive this morning. It was a little rough for me getting up, but I'm happy and feeling good about being, close to the ocean for that entire week in Vancouver, which was lovely, but also really happy to be at home. I love my home and I love my business. I'm getting back to work today. So things are good.
Perfect. I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute. We didn't talk about this. But is there anything coming up that you kind of feel is coming up for the collective right now?
Yeah, I do think so, because I'm working at so the other job that I do, one of the other things I do in my life is I sell for a dental company. And I have kind of narrowed it down to a part-time job, and where I work 2 days a week. But I was in a convention. So in the convention, it's really challenging for me because I'm used to being free and making my own time schedule. And I have to be at this place for 9 hours a day. And the one thing that's quite interesting to me, I work in dental, where it's quite linear. Things are, it's scientific. As a dentist, you have to stay on that path for a lot of reasons, because, helping people, and you wouldn't want them to be any other than scientific when it came to your teeth or working on you that way. But also they're humans. And I'm noticing a shift in how they're perceiving the world and how they're finding their way now with the shift in consciousness. And people are coming up to me at the convention. Yes, of course, they want to talk about dental and they want to talk about what I sell, but more importantly, they want to talk about how they're feeling and what they're experiencing in the world. And I think as humans, this is something that's important right now, that we take the time to listen to each other and understand that there is a shift happening. Tracy and I live that world. We're aware of it. They don't live that world. And so it's all new to them. And so being open to their experiences and being open to every experience matters to me. When I am in a conversation with someone that's authentic, whether it be in the dental world or any place, I thrive. When I'm having a conversation with someone where I'm just simply trying to sell them something and not concerned with their well-being or any of those other factors, I don't thrive. And I don't think that I'm unique. I would suggest that all of us have that experience. So we're rising to a time where it matters that we're authentic. And I see that in a lot of different ways, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. I agree with that too, actually. So we just even had a full moon, and it's been in the past week, right? Which it's been super huge here, which has been really cool to see. But one of the things about this full moon was actually just stepping more into your authenticity and more into that higher level version of self. So that's right on par and right on track with what people are experiencing. That's super cool. So I love that you shared about the dental world, because I feel like, I don't know if a lot of people know that about you or not, but maybe you can share a little bit of your background of just how did this all happen for you? Because I think a lot of people watching this show would know Sheila as the yoga teacher, and Sheila as the channeler, and Sheila as the healer. So how did this happen?
So years ago, I was working as a correctional officer. I was a jail guard, what we called it in those days. And, it was a good career in the sense that I had an amazing community there, friends that I still have to this day. It taught me a lot. I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about others. I mean, you can imagine the diversity of humans that you're coming across in that environment, and the amount of suffering and the amount of difficulties that, for sure. And I knew that that wasn't somewhere that I could stay forever. I knew it wasn't my path. And somehow something inside of me said, hey, you should be doing something different. And everyone always said, oh, you can talk to anyone. You'd be great in sales. And I'm like, yeah, I'd be great in sales. So I tried to get a sales job, but I really couldn't because I was a jail guard. So I didn't have the experience. So I applied for this job with a company called Fido. It's cell phones. I think they're still around. And they hired me
for Fido.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They hired me to sell cell phones in the mall. So I worked part-time as a sales rep and for them, and got some experience in sales. And even that taught me a lot. I had to stand in the mall at a kiosk and sell phones, and you learn a lot about yourself doing that as well. And then that gained me this momentum to find a job in dental sales, where I had no experience and I had no background for at all, and probably had no business being there. But I did go there and became quite successful at it. It was a career for probably 17, 18 years. It wasn't a career that I didn't like. It was something I did love, but something inside me just wouldn't stop this idea that I needed to start a yoga studio. You have to start a yoga studio. You have to start a yoga studio. And on paper, it didn't make sense, because the career I had was really good. I was successful. I was doing well. It was growing. My business was growing. So on paper, it wouldn't look like you would go and build a yoga studio. So of course I did, and went and did it, and created this place called Yoga Central. And anyone that's listening, if they've ever heard of it or were part of it, they know the specialness of that place. And people attribute that to me, but however, I always attribute it to everyone, because as a community, we came together in quite a special way. And I remember thinking, like, who are these people that are showing up? These amazing, kind souls and generous souls, and souls that were in suffering as well. People that had a lot of challenges, and they found their way that were there and found peace and healing. I gave everything to that yoga studio. I gave my heart and soul, and I believed in it. But the one thing that I didn't give to was myself. So I gave to everyone at the yoga studio. I gave my time. I worked 7 days a week. I'd go there in the morning. I'd be there all morning. Then I'd leave a little bit for a couple hours for myself in the afternoon and come back and be there all evening. So I was there most of every day and didn't really have a significant lifestyle for myself. I got unhealthy. I got overweight. Everything about my life that I wanted to do the yoga studio for was the opposite. Financially, I had to work those hours because the business required it for me to, pay the rent and to make sure that it worked out, everything worked out. And then because I was working too much, I was overwhelmed, and I wasn't probably focusing on the right things. I was making sure the bathroom was clean, where that really shouldn't have been what I was doing. And I can look back at it and see all the mistakes I made. And I can look back and see all the success that was there too. And the success that I would say was most prevalent at that studio was that the humans that arrived there were people that arrived there for a reason. And it was happening over and over and over. Even like how the studio ended is really quite unique and quite interesting. And I can talk about it now, but for a long time, it was like talking like about you're in love with some man or you're in love with some woman, and they break up with you, and you feel that heartbreak, and you don't want to talk about it. And that's how it was for me in the beginning. But I can talk about it quite easily because I've seen the growth and the experience that I've had from it. I don't want to get into the legal part of it, but the studio closed within 24 hours. A lot of the students might not even know what happened. They would come the next day and see the studio just wasn't there. And that just used to break my heart, thinking about how could they come there and then me not being there and the studio not there for them. And it was difficult. But within 24 hours, the studio closed. And one of my mantras at the studio was that we create a place where everyone was welcome. And that was the sort of the message at the front of the studio. And the there was a student that came, and one of the messages was from Wayne Dyer. I had gone on a trip to Europe with him. And he had sort of suggested that every one of us that was on that trip was there for a special reason. And we needed to go back and create that more peace in the world. So a world full of peaceful people made for a peaceful world. And that was our mantra at Yoga Central. And and that was based on his work and what he had taught me. And when the studio closed, Val, one of the students that came there, she brought me something from Wayne Dyer. And she said, I had to bring this today to you. I don't know why, but I brought you this. And it just almost wells me up at the thought of it. And I said, Val, you're not going to believe this, but I've got to close today. Today's the last day. And she brought me in this video of, something that the trip I had been on, experiencing the miraculous. And so it was quite profound, all those kind of things where we were all touched by each other. And we were really all brought together for something. Why it closed, sometimes I question, because so much peace and so much love was brought forward from there. But I think the biggest reason it closed is because I couldn't sustain that lifestyle. I wasn't learning that I needed to give up control, that I needed to allow people to help me. And I wasn't learning that lesson. So it sort of came in a way that I believe my guides, and might sound hokey to people, but my guides guided me out of there because it wasn't healthy for me. And it wasn't a good place for me to continue to overgive and not receive. So I had to go through the process to kind of grow towards to learn that. And when I did, it's like a whole shift in my life has changed where I do still love to give and I still like to offer, but I love to receive too. And I've created a place of more balance in my life where I will receive in a way that matters because I matter. So I was pushing everything onto everyone else, helping everyone else because I didn't want to look at me. So you can only do that for so long. And then the universe comes in and says, sorry, this is not sustainable. So I'm not saying that I'm cured of my this need to please and to help others. I'd say I still have a strong desire for that, but I'm definitely cured of doing it over and over all day long, which I was doing. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I find, it's a whole rabbit hole we could really go down. I feel like I've worked for many yoga studios over a decade now as well. And it's a hard business model. It's a hard business model because it's one of those things, this is just my opinion, so you can, of course, you might not agree, but it's a hard business model from the perspective of most people that want to purchase yoga classes want to have the option to go to yoga anytime they want, right? And why wouldn't you as a consumer, right? But the reality of trying to make that work in a sustainable way so that it's a win-win can often be very difficult.
Yeah, the business of yoga is tough. But I mean, that was my experience. And I know there are successful yoga studios out there that do really well and have a good model. And I often think that, we think that we know what we're doing. We think we understand that business. I didn't know what I was doing in a lot of ways. I was naive to a lot of things and to the harshness of realities of, a landlord that was not a spiritual entity in any way at all. But if you understood, I don't want to get into the details of that, but if you understood why they closed my business, it makes no sense. Yeah, the rent was paid, everything was looked after. From their perspective, I believe it was a guided situation. I don't think that they had a choice to do anything different. If you ask them from a business perspective why they did what they did, it wouldn't make sense. But I just think that the guides had to intervene and had to somehow get me the heck out of there. So they were the kind of the scapegoat to do that, right?
Right.
So, people wouldn't necessarily believe that. And they're like, you should sue them and you should, how dare they, but I mean, my thought afterwards was like, I'm grateful because I wasn't listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even though it was hard, was there also part of you that was somewhat relieved, maybe might be the right word?
Yeah, for sure. There was a lot of me that was relieved. Like when I woke up the next day and I didn't have to, go anywhere, I was like, what am I going to do? I was sort of walking in circles. And then of course, COVID hit. So I was walking in more circles. Yeah. And so through all that, the channeling actually started to come forward. So
Mm,
if I didn't slow down and stop, I'm not sure I would have found the channeling, which is something that I find so powerful to be part of. So yeah, a lot of it is interesting. A lot of it is seems unfair, seems like, why would you allow that situation to happen? I like to live my life from a very spiritual perspective. And to look at it at the time, I wouldn't have looked at it that way. Of course not. I was a victim. I was, how dare they do that? I was in that form as well. But going back and looking at it from a bird's eye view now, I'm grateful.
yeah. And
Yeah.
divine timing then obviously as well too.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that time, were you doing sessions with people yet? Had you stepped into that healer role?
No, I hadn't. Oh, sorry. I shouldn't say that. Yes, I was practicing at the studio. So my friend Shirley would come down to the studio and we would see if there was a client or a student that was kind of in a challenging place. And we'd say, hey, we want to practice this healing work on you. Are you open? And sure enough, we'd, do our practices, and we laugh about that time because there were some crazy things that would happen. And we're like, what was that? What just happened there? And so it was all a learning time for sure. But we were doing that at the studio. Yes. And I was teaching a really powerful class with meditation. And I had some crazy experiences in that class. I remember one time, usually everyone, I'd say, okay, now we're going to do meditation. You can stay for the meditation or you can leave. So some people would leave and some people would stay. And this one day, only one lady stayed. And I said to her, it looks like you cleared the room out. Like, what's going on? So we do the meditation, and both of us, like, she came to me a couple of days later and she said, what happened? What happened in that room? That was crazy. And both of us were sort of like, whoa. There was a healing and a profound experience that happened for her mainly. I mean, I was guiding it, but I was watching and observing it, and it was powerful. So things were happening for sure. Things were starting to come forward at that time.
Okay. And so then COVID happened, we all get shut down, and then what? What did you do next?
Then I sort of sat for a while. I just sat and didn't know what to do. I was trying to think, should I get back into the business? Like, how could I make this work? How can I make Yoga Central maybe somehow go forward? People are like, are you going to keep this going? You can't stop. And I'm trying to think of ways of doing it. And when COVID came in, my options became less and less, I guess. So I guess I had to start to think of how am I going to feed myself? I've got to try to make a living. And that's when the channeling started to happen. And fortunately, I had really good friends that, supported me in that. Shirley and Colleen were really instrumental in just not making me, but being forceful in the fact that you got to do this. And, helping me with, my cousin needs a reading. Can you do that for them? And, Karen from Riverside Acres, so had somehow heard about me from one of Shirley's friends, Carrie, sort of convoluted way. And she just knows so many people. And so she started referring people to me. So it just kind of sort of snowballed that way. And we talk about how things happen quite easily. It did happen very easily. That wasn't a difficult thing for me, where the yoga studio was a challenging thing. This was not a challenging thing.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how that kind of always happens that way? Hey.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I love about your story too, is it's a beautiful example of how oftentimes, and I feel like this is, and it's the same thing for me, I feel like this is a lot of people's experience, is even though we would really like the path to be very linear, right? And very step by step by step by step by step. Often it's not linear at all, even though we end up in exactly the right place at exactly the right time.
And, you can often look back and say, would I make that choice again? Of course not, because now I've grown and I've learned the lesson, right? I've thrived through it. Would I want to go through the hardship of it? No, not at all. Right. So it's funny that you're in Mexico, because when the studio closed 1 week later, I had a trip booked to go to Mexico with 4 of my girlfriends from back home. I'm from Saskatchewan, and we ended up in Mexico for a week, and I wasn't in a good place. I mean, I just lost everything. I was kind of in a rough place, but I couldn't have landed in a softer, more harmonious situation with beautiful souls who know me from a child, and are my friends since then. And they held me during that trip. And, you know, they came out to the ocean every night after dinner. I said, we've got to go to the ocean. I need healing. And they came with me, and they prayed, and they, you know, we had so many laughs and so many good times just by going and doing that. So, yeah, it's funny how you end up, you know, I landed in a good place, but, you know, being in Mexico, seeing you there reminds me of that time when, you know, I was in a lot of suffering. I was really trying to figure out how am I going to go forward?
Yeah. A dark night of the soul, I guess, so to speak. Hey.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And today now, and so fast forward to today, where are you at now?
Today, I'm in a sort of a flux. Sometimes I go into this, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? But I've kind of come to a clear understanding, just probably in the last month, to trust the path. I haven't been good at trusting, and I haven't been good. I will go into sessions with people, and I'll do the healing and the channeling, and I'll trust in that moment, and I'll feel it, and I'll experience it. I'll know there's something greater than, and then I'll go back to my life and I'll live it differently without the trust. And so I realize that I'm teaching this message of trust, but not living it. And, you know, I've had some pretty harsh messages that come up in the middle of the night. One of them was before the yoga, 2 weeks before the yoga studio closed, which I wasn't aware that was going to happen. I got a message in the middle of the night that you're going to lose everything. And I was like, you wake up and you're like, was that real? Did that really happen? No, that couldn't have happened. No, that was not a real message. And yeah, that happened. And then another one of those messages was, you're not listening. You're not listening. So I'm getting the messages and hearing them, but I'm not listening to them, and I'm not living them. So after getting the message, you're going to lose everything, and it happened, and you're not listening, I'm very awake to those messages. And the reason I'm not listening is because I'm not trusting. And so I'm moving into this new phase of trusting right now. And I think it's significant because I can feel myself not being drawn off the path the way I have been in the past. And I can feel myself being more focused and diligent about what I have to offer and what I know to be true. So while I'm at a dental convention, not only am I selling dental supplies, but I'm meeting and chatting to dentists what I know to be true. It's not something that I can segregate. It's not something that I can only be in this part of my life or that part of my life. This is who I am authentically all the time. And yes, I've lost family members. I've lost friends because of that, but I can no longer be what you want me to be. I have to be truthful and trust who I am and be authentic. And if my words and my understanding of the world don't jive with you, I get it. I understand it. It doesn't have to jive with you. It has to jive with me.
I love that. And I think that's a beautiful message for a lot of people that will come across this live at some point in time, from the aspect of, I think for me too, like along the spiritual journey, you get to a certain place where it's like, no longer can you compartmentalize what you do and who you are. And I feel like sometimes that might even be maybe the right term would be an initiation or a rite of passage that a lot of us go through. You know, you start to come out of the spiritual closet, you could say, a little bit, right? And you use it in certain areas of your life, or you use it in areas of your business. But when you talk to certain people in your life, maybe it's family or whatever, they have no idea what you do, right? And that can only go on for so long until you get to this place where it's now you're the double agent, right? Living, and it's exhausting. It's so exhausting to have to be those different things to different people. And I know for me, finally you get to that point where it's like, no, I can't do that anymore. It has to be just this. Not just, but it has to be this.
Yeah. And I went, on the plane from Vancouver, I went back and listened to our old, the YouTubes that we had dropped already, and the channeling of Barbara Walters. And she talks about the different boxes, like being this and being that, and not doing that. And I find that kind of interesting, because that's sort of the place in my life I'm at, where, yeah, I might not talk your talk. I might not talk your language. I might see the world. When you tell me that your husband left you, I might say, wow, that's fantastic. What's next? You might not want to hear that, and you might think I'm a dick or whatever you might think, but I can't compromise what I know and understand for what you need to hear in the moment. So that's where things start to get real. That's when you start to say, okay, am I okay being authentic? Because that's what I believe. Am I going to say, I'm so sorry? Because I'm not, because I know everything in our world happens because something needs to wake up in our lives. I was fantastic at not listening and not waking up. I don't want anyone to be like me and have to wake up one day and have nothing. Are you kidding me? Like, that was something I would never wish on anyone. To not know how I was going to pay for my groceries. How am I going to eat tomorrow? Those are the questions I face. Those are where I was in this world. So riding the plane out to Vancouver, interesting, I got to sit by two little drug dealers. They were happy to tell me about their life. And the one guy says to me, you look like you're a rich lady from, I don't know. He goes, I want to be like you. And I said, gosh, I don't think you want to be like me. You're looking at me from a lens that's not true. I need to be authentic with you. This is who I am. I'm someone who has had nothing. I'm someone just like looked at others and wondered, how am I going to feed myself tomorrow? So no, I'm not sure you want to be like me. I want to teach you not to be like me. I want to teach you to listen to the messages that are out there. I want to teach you to thrive and know who you are from who you are, not to be like me or who you think I am.
There's this saying, and I don't remember who said it or the exact words, but it's something about, how we learn what it is that we need to teach, right? Or we experience what it is that we need to share in the world. Is that something that you believe to be true?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I remember this when my father died, and people would come up to me and say, I'm so sorry about the death of your father. And I could tell within a second whether they had a parent that died or not, because their understanding and their energetics towards me were different if they had experienced it. And it's not saying that they're wrong because their parent didn't die or they weren't empathetic, but there was a difference. So when you know something, you know it. You can say to someone, I'm sorry about the loss, to Kim, I'm sorry about the loss of your son. I've never lost a child or, my niece or nephew. My experience of expressing that to her will be different than a parent or someone that's lost someone deeply like that.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality. It's not against the other person for not having that experience. It's just, it seems to be a reality. So, I think I've had a lot of rough experiences. I think I've gone through a lot of, I keep telling the universe, I'm good. I want to learn it the easy way now. Yeah.
But do you find that the people that are drawn to work with you, though, then you're seeing the reflection or the mirror back of, you're like, oh yeah, I remember what that was like when I went through it.
It's fascinating. Or I might be going through it with them at the same time. So, when I got the message, you're not listening, they bring the exact person to come to me that's going through the exact thing and giving them the message, the right message at the right time that I wasn't listening to, and expecting my client to listen to it. Yeah, go away and you carry on and you listen to that, but I'm not going to,
Touche. Totally. Yeah. Spirit works in mysterious ways.
Yeah. It's not something that I'm necessarily would suggest, okay, go live your life in a really harsh way. Go lose everything. Go have family members, lose friends. I'm not saying that's a good way to live your life, but I'm saying that live your life authentically. And what happens and comes of that, see what happens and how you can thrive from there. Because the more authentic I become, the less dependent I am on anything other than myself to really be happy. I'm happy when I'm with family. Of course, I love those situations. I'm happy when I'm with friends, but I can be completely happy when I'm just alone with me. And I can be completely authentic with a dentist or with someone that is like Tracy or Kim, that are spiritually minded like I am, or live the same kind of life that I live. But I can still equally be as happy with my boss, who's an Orthodox Jewish person. And him and I can thrive together. Although we have different beliefs and different understandings of the world, we can still thrive as humans together too, because he's very authentic to who he is. He does not deviate from who he is. And if I can do the same, we have this powerful relationship together, even though we have completely different beliefs.
And that's the power of authenticity, right? Is that we're able to stand rooted in who we are, and with other people that are able to stand rooted in who they are, and the differences no longer matter.
That's correct. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes they make it that much more interesting. Like, I don't know about you, but I when I stand with someone else who has their own views, spiritual or otherwise, I'm curious. Like, tell me more about that, because even though that might not be what I subscribe to, I feel like there's something that I can learn.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tracy, for sure. And I think the more we become curious and the more we become interested in others and other humans, we start to realize that the differences are less and less.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. So can you share like maybe 3 things that maybe nobody might know about you from watching this show?
Yeah, probably 3 things. People wouldn't have known I was a correctional officer and worked in the jail for many years. You wouldn't know, they wouldn't have known that I've lost everything. Was very successful financially and then became very unsuccessful financially very, very quickly. That's one thing that people might not know. And the third thing is that I've had a lot of experiences in life. And some of them you wouldn't know. I came from a challenging childhood, very, very tumultuous home that I grew up in, loving in a lot of ways, but very, very difficult in a lot of ways. I've experienced sexual abuse. I've experienced not believing in myself. And I think that the thing that really drove me to healing was that I really couldn't, there was something so strong inside of me that wanted to believe in myself. I wanted that so badly, and I didn't have it. And everything in my life exhibited the opposite. So I guess the third thing is that I never believed in myself.
Up until, was there a catalyst moment?
I'm going to say it's still I'm still a work in progress, because when I was in Vancouver, I noticed things about myself. I had time to reflect and to notice, and I'm like, okay, I still have that issue. I still have this going on. And I was able to look at that. But I would say in a big way, probably since COVID hit. So when I lost everything, that was when I became completely aware that I wasn't believing in myself in a big way, and it was time to change. And it became more and more, the way it was possible to not believe myself, it just became more and more possible to believe in myself. So it shifted. Something shifted at that time. And even the way I viewed money and the way I viewed my who I was around money had to shift. Mm-hmm. So that all changed. And I can no longer look at the world from the lens that I had prior to losing Yoga Central. So I think of Yoga Central and losing it as my spiritual awakening, an awakening to myself and being able to believe in myself. Without that, I'm not sure that I would have the understanding that I have today.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, that was fun. And I think I have a really interesting story, as do all humans. But Tracy and I talked before that we were going to each share our stories. So I'd love to, turn the tables back to you, Tracy, because I know you have an interesting background and it would be fun for the listeners to hear about that as well.
Yeah, it's one of those journeys where it's never linear, and definitely didn't transpire or turn out the way that I would have expected it to. I grew up in a small town, where everything was safe. Everybody knew everybody. I had that story of, I can't wait to get out of the small town so that nobody knows who I am and I can, live my life, and moved to the city and worked for a couple of years, and then decided to go to university to be a teacher. And I remember, my parents being so terrified that because I didn't go to school right out of high school, that I would like never go to school. And my parents, neither of them had like a secondary education. My dad had a trade, but neither of them went to university. And so for them, that was like a big dream for both me and my brother, was that we would go to school and we would get some kind of degree. And then of course it was the whole, white picket fence idea, right? You go, you get a good job, you get benefits, you get a pension so that you're taken care of for the rest of your life. And then you get married and you have 2.5 kids and, you do all the things, right? And up until, just over the age of 30, that's pretty much exactly what I did with my life. And after having 2 kids and going back to teaching, I found it really exhausting. Like I was teaching grade 1 and I found it very hard to have 2 toddlers at home and teach grade 1 at the same time. It was a lot of energy being expended in the same kind of way. And so I started to look for, I just kind of felt like I'd lost myself. I felt like there was definitely a theme of overgiving, right? Because I had 2 kids at home. I had a husband at home. I was overgiving to a classroom of grade 1s every day. And that was how I found yoga. Is I signed up for yoga teacher training without ever taking a yoga class. I don't know who does that, because then I remember being in like the 3rd class and our teacher being like, okay, so today we're going to start to talk about inversions. And I was like, nudging the person next to me. I was like, what is inversion? Like, what is that? It's like, oh, like headstands and handstands. And I was like, oh, fuck. I was not limber in that way, like at all, right? Like I was still working on the crescent lunge and stuff, let alone standing on my head, right? But I was loving the philosophy piece of it and the meditation piece. And so when I took it, I'd never even meant to teach. Like it was just something for me. And I could get out of the house and I could be with adults, and I didn't have to talk to anybody and I didn't have to worry about anybody else. It was just a me thing. And after I had finished it, my husband had said to me, like, so like, do you think you could maybe just go teach and at least make back the money you spent on the training so we could break even? Or like, my husband's very scientific and very linear. And I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe, so I started to just sob, like just literally kind of, again, going through the motion. That seemed to be a big thing for me, and realized how much I loved it. And I was so blessed that I worked for someone who wasn't linear in how we did yoga. So I didn't have to do yoga a certain way. I didn't have to do back bends at this point in the class, or I didn't have to do inversions only at this point in the class, or it was extremely creative. And I got to teach however I wanted to, which was just such a great gift of being able to express myself in a way that I'd never had before, because up until then, I think no matter what I had done, it was always some version of that box, right? That Barbara Walters talked about. So I had this beautiful, and I was so blessed also that, that she mentored me and I fell in love with it. And there was a long time where I wanted to open a yoga studio too. I had that dream for a long time as well, but I worked there for about a decade. And as I did that, I was watching her and watching other people have these lives where they would go and travel whenever they wanted, and they would do yoga retreats and they would do all of these things. And here I was teaching yoga on the side, having a little bit of mom guilt because it was taking time away from my family in order for me to do it on top of my full-time job. And just starting to really see that I wanted something different in life than what I had at that time. And on my own time, on evenings and weekends and things like that, not only was I teaching yoga, but I was starting to then dive into meditation, and I took meditation teacher training, and I got my Reiki, and I was practicing Reiki, and a lot of those kind of almost entry level things that we often talk about that people start with in their past. And I got gifted. That's how I look at it. I don't know how it happened, but I started talking about meditation and mindfulness in schools, and I started to kind of experiment in my classroom a little bit, because the meditation teacher training that I took, the same one that Kim took, focused a lot on self-regulation and the nervous system. And I was watching all of these kids that I was teaching, and I was like, well, why aren't we teaching it to them? Like, if I had these skills, like at this time I was just over 30, and if I would have had these skills when I was a kid, my life would have been very different. My relationships would be very different. So I started to teach it in my grade 3 at that time classroom, but it was like, I was kind of doing it under the radar, right? Because at that time, you didn't want to use the word meditation. You didn't want to use the word yoga or anything like that in a public school, because parents would just be beside themselves, right? But I was just kind of doing it and not really calling it anything. And eventually the principal came to me, and other teachers were coming to me because they were noticing a difference in my classroom. They would walk in and the entire energy would be different. The energy of the kids was different. How they were operating was different. How they were choosing was different. And they were like, what's happening here? And teach me how to do it, because this is awesome, kind of thing, right? So I ended up landing a 3-year pilot project where I was a mindfulness teacher and coach at a time when there wasn't even a school program that existed in Canada. So I was literally creating and writing the curriculum and matching it to the program of studies as I was doing these 3 years. And I was teaching mindfulness meditation under the health curriculum. I managed to fit it into the health curriculum, and I taught K-6 for 3 years. All I taught was mindfulness meditation, and it was amazing. It was the most beautiful job ever. And had I been able to stay in that position when I was also doing professional development for other schools and other teachers and things like that, and had that pilot project been extended, I think I probably might even still be there right now. I don't know. It was a beautiful job. But at the end of the 3 years, I then had a different principal, and one who had much more of a belief in technology than in meditation and mindfulness and self-regulation. So the project ended, and I was put back into the regular classroom. And then the contrast was huge, because I was full-time in a classroom. I was back to doing, all of the classroom things, the paperwork, like all of this stuff. And I really realized that the reason I became a teacher was to teach. And that was the smallest amount of my job, was actually teaching. And I mean, I have so much respect for all the teachers that are out there, whether I know them or not, because, you're not just a teacher, you're a mom, you're a psychologist, you're a social worker, you're all of the things, right? And I started to get a little resentful. Like I started, like, honestly, to have a little bit of anger towards how the system was, because to me, it was just so fucking broken. And I didn't want to be in it anymore. And it was taking a toll on me. It was taking a toll on my health. It was taking a toll on stress. It was taking a toll on my family, because of course, all that kind of stuff will enter into your home and whatnot. And so I had to find a way out. And so my way out was massage therapy. And I didn't realize that at the time, but that definitely was like, it was just a gateway, right? Like, it was the safety net. It was the one thing that I could choose that at the time I was okay with doing, that people could somewhat understand, because everybody was like, well, what do you mean you're leaving a job with a pension and benefits and, summer holidays and all of the things, right? To go and be a sole, sorry, not a solopreneur, it would have been a sole proprietor at the time, right? And so even that just took a lot of, I guess at the time, what I would have called convincing, right? With my husband, with my parents, because now I was going to school for 2 years full time, plus I was teaching, plus I had kids at home and all the things, right? I remember being up till 4 a.m. studying for my anatomy exam, sleeping for an hour and a half, getting back up and, getting the kids off to where they needed to go so I could go and write the exam. And it was a tough 2 years. But eventually I finished after 2 years. And then I took a year off. I just took a leave. I didn't quit. And I took a year off to see what it would be like if I just did massage full time. And I did that for a year and built up some clientele. And after that school year was done, I just gave up my contract and left. And once I did that, then everything else started to open up in the world, right? Then I started, to dabble in past lives and started to experiment even more and started to do all of those different things. But again, it was not a linear journey, right? It was more like this. And at the time, like I remember the part of the reason that I actually took the leave from the school division in the first place was because I got surplus. And the school division I worked for covered quite a wide variety. So I was always driving to Spruce Grove, which was half an hour away from where I lived. But then I got placed in, I think it was Duffield, which is like a super like small, like blip on the map, basically. But it would have been like an hour drive each way. Like it was like everything about my placement just didn't fit with my family. It would have cost me an hour each way. I couldn't massage on the side. It was only half days. So then I was like wasting 2 hours of every day driving. It wasn't even every second day. And I left honestly feeling very victimized because I was like, I'd spent, over 10 years with this one school division. And it just felt like I was kind of being cast aside, like nothing I had done, was being acknowledged or mattered. The work I'd done in mindfulness didn't matter. And so I definitely left with a bit of a bad taste in my mouth at the time. I didn't see the gift in it that I see now, but it was interesting.
I love that our stories are similar and not similar. There's a parallel to them, but in a sense, I feel like we are pioneers. Like you are a pioneer in the school system offering the mindfulness. I do see that as something coming forward more and more now. I see parents probably really recognizing that there is value in that. At the time they weren't because it was new, right? And it was hard for people to see that. I guess my question to you would be is, do you see any, like you must still have connections with your other, do you see the school system changing or offering more opportunity for that for children?
I see teachers wanting and desiring and asking for change. And after I left, a couple of years after, like in the particular school I was at, it didn't continue, but I know from other places that I'd done professional development in the Edmonton area that it has continued, and it is something that teachers now use daily because they see the value of it. With that being said, though, there's so many big things within the structure of school divisions that just it takes so much time for them to change. Like I really hope that I will see a different school system by the time I have my own grandchildren, right? It's one of those things that won't change overnight. But this is totally my personal opinion and I could be wrong, but I feel like it has to almost crumble before it's going to change. And the stories that I'm hearing from the teachers that are my clients and the teachers that I'm still in contact with now is it's getting worse. Getting worse, especially with COVID, right? Like now kids have a different set of needs that they didn't have before because they were isolated for 2 years and because they didn't have the same type of education that they would have had if they would have been in school. And there's a lot of people left the school as well, right? Just like in any other occupation, right? People were forced to make a choice. Some people, decided to go with that. Some people decided to leave. And some people had to leave because of health concerns, whatever that looks like, right? But what I'm seeing is, from what I'm being told anyways, is becoming more evident is that it's actually getting worse rather than getting better.
So I'm fascinated because what you're saying is it has to crumble before it gets better. And I mean, I had to crumble before I found my way out, which is interesting. And I maintain that it doesn't have to crumble before it gets better. There was every sign in the world telling me to change. There was everything out there telling me to do something different. We have children with a lot of suffering, and from what I observe is a lot of, I talk to these children and I see their needs and their anxieties and their stress. We have this coming on in our world. Maybe we had it when we were young and we just didn't acknowledge it. I almost believe that. I'm sure I was an anxious mess as a child. So we probably had the same challenges, but we just ignored it. And then you have people like me that grow up suffering, completely against who they are, completely trying to fit into a model that they don't fit into, and the suffering that happens in the world. So I guess for you, Tracy, it's powerful that you walked away from a system that went against who you were. So you saw the signs and you listened. Mm-hmm. So that to me is really a powerful message. Here's two of us contrasting each other. Tracy listened, I didn't listen, you know? So we have two people doing this life in a different way. And I think you have a big message as far as listening. So I'd like to hear about that from you as well.
Well, it's interesting that you would choose to phrase it that way, because I kind of felt like I got pushed, to be honest. Like I at the time, I felt like I got backed into a bit of a corner where it was either, I continue with the system, but I knew that it was not a good fit for me, or I had to choose something else. And I think that at the time, part of why I was a little bit angry was because I would have rather that it looked like me just choosing, if that makes sense. Right. Without that push into the corner. Right. I would have rather just been able to step up and be like, you know what, I'm just deciding. Right. It's the utopic idea of I'm just deciding I'm not doing it anymore. And it's all blissful. But it wasn't like that. It was sometimes it's when we make a choice, it's the best of the worst in a way, and I think even though that wasn't the case, that's how I saw it at the time, because I would have rather had a clientele built up. I would have rather exited in a different way than I chose to. But I also recognize that I had been asking for that for years, like 2 years probably. I've been asking for a way out. And so I had that time of 2 years where I could have just chose to go, and I didn't. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think that's for our listeners is powerful too. If they can look at us and look at their own life, and just go, whoa, what's working and what's not? And why isn't it working? Right?
Yeah.
Why is it working? And why do we live in a society that just goes against our human nature? It's fascinating. It is fascinating. And look at the side of life that we provide, the side that brings us back to our heart, back to connecting to source, connecting to peace and love. Why is that so woo-woo, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we get caught up in the, it's like how I explained how I started my life, right? Doing all the things I should do. It's almost like that is so conditioned in us that these are the things that we should do. Like, I remember having people say to me when I left teaching, things like, well, it must have been easy for you because you were married, so you had a second income, or you're lucky that you have someone to support you, or, so there was those kind of comments and assumptions made from the perspective of, those are choices that are available to you because you have that should life, right? Whereas other people don't. Is that making any sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it's really like, I stay with my husband because, I need his income, or and I'm here to tell you, like, anytime you're staying somewhere or doing something that goes against your soul, no matter what you try or how you keep it there, you're going to suffer. It is suffering. It is suffering. I've seen it over and over. I saw it in my own life. I stayed doing something, working at something where I was suffering because I wasn't acknowledging my own needs. If you don't acknowledge your own needs, there's no way out.
That's right.
It is suffering.
Yeah. And I mean, I totally get that, because if I were to rewind, actually, something a lot of people don't know about me is, so when I was taking my meditation teacher training after yoga, I went to meditation retreat, and it was 5 days or 7 days. I can't remember, but it was a fully immersive retreat. So basically I was just sleeping at home. Like, I was out of the house by like 5:30 in the morning, and I was getting home till about midnight. And it was truly transformative on a lot of levels. And I had been married at that point for, gosh, let me think, my kids. Yeah, we'd been married for maybe almost 10 years at that point, and it wasn't happily married. The first couple of years were, but once the kids came in, it was pretty rough. It was pretty rough, and a lot of things changed, and we became very disconnected. And I think part of the reason that I turned to yoga at the time that I did was because I wasn't happy in my marriage and things weren't working out. And I was at this place in my life where I felt like I had become a mom, become a wife, become a teacher, become all of the labels. And I was sitting there going, okay, but who am I? Like, who is Tracy outside of all of those labels when I'm not the mom and I'm not the teacher and I'm not the wife? And it was like I had lost myself. And I think that that was part of the underlying reason that I wanted to take yoga, is because I was seeking myself again. It was who am I and what do I want? Because I know that what I have right now is not it. Right. Even though I had two beautiful children and a beautiful home and all of those things, I was extremely unfulfilled. And so by the time I went to that meditation retreat, it had been a couple of years of having a really rocky marriage and basically just, what people describe as coexisting in a home, right? Where you're basically just roommates, but there's no relationship. And at the end of that meditation retreat, something had shifted in me. And a couple of weeks after the retreat, I just looked at my husband one day. I was sitting in the dining room and he came in to ask me a question. And it literally just fell out of my mouth. And it was my first out of body experience where it was like I could hear what I was saying, but it was like I was standing 3 feet back and watching everything transpire, if that makes sense. And I had looked at him and I had just said, I want a divorce. And he was like, what? And I remember watching myself feeling just as shocked, I'm sure, as he was, as I heard the words come out of my mouth. And I remember thinking in my head, I'm like, what the fuck is happening right now? But it was like I was two separate, we could say beings, I guess, at that point. And then it snowballed into this whole thing. And we did separate and we did go through and all of this stuff. And we did end up back together. But the lesson that I take out of that for me is, up until that point, I had always believed what I'd been conditioned to believe, which was that I needed to have a man in my life in order to succeed, in order to be happy, in order to live, in order to do all of the things. And that was what was broken down out of that experience, because it brought me to the place of understanding that if I'm going to be in relationship, it's going to be because I choose to and I want to, not because I have to. And those are two very different things. And it's a very different relationship when you're in it at a choice rather than in it because you're shackled to it.
Fascinating how really what it came down to was you having to really find your inner truth. We all want to look at someone else and it's their fault, or it's, if my husband would only do this, then our marriage would thrive. If others would only act this way, then I could thrive. And I think doing this spiritual work, we come to this deep understanding of self. And it sounds like that's what you had to do. You had to break down the marriage to understand that, what you were bringing forward wasn't the truth, wasn't being authentic.
Yeah, there was so much unlearning that needed to happen. And I don't say that from a place of like, it's my parents' fault or it's my upbringing's fault or any of that, right? Because it's not. I'm the one that chose, right? That, it's there's this phrase that I use that's used in subconscious imprinting. And it starts with all the lies that I've bought and sold. Right. And I always find that phrase powerful from the perspective of it puts all of the responsibility to me, right? I chose to take that belief or that piece of conditioning on as my own. And that's okay. It's not from a place of beating up myself or faulting myself, but it's the recognition that if I have the power to choose that, I also have the power to unchoose that or to choose something different at the same time.
Wow, your story is fascinating, Tracy. I mean, I wish we had more time because you could probably go on and enlighten us to, your experience in this world. I mean, that's just a little snippet of who you are for sure. I'm going to turn this to you now and say 3 things that people wouldn't know about you. So like you did with me. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one would definitely be the part about my marriage, because it's not something that I talk about a ton. So that would be one. 3 things. Second thing, let's see if I can say something I haven't said yet. The second thing that people may not, I am a fucking terrible cook. I hate cooking. I intentionally married someone that could cook, and my husband has his red seal, his chef seal. He's not a chef, but he just picked it up along the way. And I intentionally married someone that could like do all of the meals. He doesn't do all of the meals. I do some of the cooking, but that's the one thing. If I could, some people are like, I'd hire a house cleaner. No, I would hire a chef, hands down. Not my jam at all. I am very undomesticated for being like a wife. Like I don't do a lot of those things. So I've broken the mold on that. So that's another thing. And the third thing, oh, you know what? I don't eat. It's just so funny because we've been in Mexico for 2 weeks, and here, like right now, as I'm looking at my balcony, you can see that there's fishermen, like they stand on the shore and they cast out and they catch fish. And I actually don't eat fish or seafood, like none of it, not a stitch of it. So when I was a kid, one of my dad's little like side hustles is he was a commercial fisherman. And so he would come home and he would take what he had caught in the net and he would dump it into our bathtub. And the smell could not, I was quite little, like I was maybe like 3. And that has just like burned into my brain, the smell of that. And so I cannot eat any fish or seafood because I can't stand the smell. My nose trumps my mouth every time. So those are my 3 things.
That's interesting. And I think one of the things that I learned today about you, Tracy, is that you are definitely a pioneer in the sense that you're willing to speak of the things that you see in the system that's not working, and you're willing to change them. You're willing to step up and change them. The other thing is that I don't think you're alone in a lot of relationships. Anyone listening to this, it's in a relationship, in partnership with whoever, man, woman, 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 man, man, etc. Could actually listen to that and say, wow, that matters to me, what you've said. Because a lot of us have been conditioned to believe that if our relationships aren't working, there's something wrong, when there could be something completely right happening. Like the rightness of what happened for you and your partnership was that it was time to look at it and examine it. Yeah. And go through what you needed to go through to make it better. So sitting in suffering has been our conditioning, and your story is teaching the opposite, which I think is super powerful for people.
Thank you. Thank you. I will be honest, it wasn't easy for anybody. It wasn't easy for me. It wasn't easy for my kids. My kids still remember it, like it's not like anybody came out unscathed, I guess is the word for it. But even last night, as we were sitting having dinner, my kids are teenagers now. They're 13 and they're 15, right? And my husband made a comment, or I don't know, I can't remember what he said, something, and my daughter was like, ew, like my parents, kind of thing. And my husband looked at my daughter and he said, you should be really grateful that you have 2 parents that still love each other. And I was like, yeah, because at this point in a lot of people's relationships, when their kids are 13 and 15, that's not there anymore. And I wouldn't trade that for anything, regardless of the fact that there were hurt feelings and it was hard and all of the things. I wouldn't change any of it. I wouldn't change any of it.
Yeah, I'm with you, Tracy. For what I know and what I understand about the world, to watch people live in authentic ways and live in that suffering, I wouldn't change my awakening to live like that again. Because that is living in suffering. Yeah. Yeah.
What's funny is when we thought Kim was going to be here and we were going to do a show on suffering, and then we scrapped the whole idea just to talk about each other. And here we are, right back full circle. It's perfect. It's perfect. Yeah.
We'll definitely have to give Kim's full story too. She's got a fascinating background as well. So be interesting to hear her full story. But we only touched on a small amount of who you and I are and our small amount of our experiences. And our listeners, I think it gives you an idea and an understanding of where we come from and why we are so passionate about what we do and having a spiritual view and why it matters to us. So, there was a time when I wouldn't have wanted to let anyone know that I was doing this or speak out or channel online or do the things that I do. And now I could care less. I don't have any misunderstanding that it matters that I have to worry about what other people think. That's gone. It's really gone in a big way.
Yeah. And that's a huge message. And something I hope that everyone that listens to this takes away is just this fact that it is an evolution, right? It takes time to get there, right? So you're going to go through the stages of, first of all, it might just be with a small group of people that you share your gifts, or that you choose to kind of explore spirituality or whatever that looks, right? It's an ongoing process. But it's also a beautiful illustration that eventually you will get to that point where you will also no longer give a fuck. Right? Right? And you
Yeah.
will step into that authenticity. And the journey to it is just as beautiful as what you might see as the end result.
Yeah. Thank you, Tracy. What a beautiful episode today. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there anything else you want to share before we go?
I think I've shared a lot today, so I'm good. Yeah. I
Awesome.
feel.
Okay.
Anything you have left to say, Tracy?
I don't think so. I just like and subscribe, and you can take this conversation to the Facebook group if you have any questions for us, or if you want to share with us, what resonated for you or what you're taking away. We would love to hear that, because of course all views are welcome in the Spiritual View. And we will see you all next week at 9:30 Mountain Standard Time.